Hey, it's great that you could be with us. And if you're watching this around the time that it comes out, then a very happy new year to you. I really do hope that for all of us, 2021 is a better year than last. I'm not sure what you're hoping 2021 is going to be like. I actually saw a post on Facebook that said, "Dear 2021, you have literally been handed the easiest job in history. You don't need to be the best year ever. You don't even need to be top 20. You have one job. Be better than 2020. Please don't mess that one up. Sincerely, everybody." If you're setting the bar low for this year, well, I totally get it. Hopefully you have some hope, and if not, then maybe go listen to the sermon from a few weeks back again. But I wonder, what are you hoping this coming year is going to be like? When we come to this time next year, when we come to the end of 2021, what are you wanting to look back on and see? What are you hoping is going to characterize 2021? Maybe you've already thought about it. Maybe you haven't. Maybe you've got a list of things. Maybe you don't. Wherever you're at, what I'm hoping is that as we spend some time looking at Deuteronomy 6 today, it'll help you to decide what should come nearest the top of your list. We'll be looking at the first 9 verses of Deuteronomy 6, and it'd be great if you could have a Bible open in front of you while you listen, unless you're driving, in which case maybe don't. The Bible reading is taken from Deuteronomy 6, so follow along or just listen if you don't have a Bible in front of you. Hear the word of the Lord. This is the command, the rules and the judgments which Yahweh your God commanded me to teach you to do in the land which you are crossing over to take possession of, so that you'll fear Yahweh your God by keeping all of his rules and commands which I am commanding you, your children and your children's children, all the days of your life, so that your days would be lengthened. Listen, Israel, and keep it by doing it, so that it will go well for you, and so that you'll multiply greatly, just as Yahweh your God told your fathers, in a land flowing with milk and honey. Listen, Israel, Yahweh is our God, Yahweh alone. You'll love Yahweh, your God, with all your heart, and with all your being, and with all your strength. And these words, which I am commanding you this day, will be on your hearts, and you'll repeat them to your children when you sit with them in your house, and when you go on your way, when you lie down and when you stand up. Tie them to your hands, and as a symbol beneath your eyes, write them on the doorposts of your houses and on your gates. This is the word of the Lord. Now here in Deuteronomy, we have some of the most important words of the Old Testament, arguably some of the most important words in the whole Bible. But before we get there, Moses actually begins with where he wants the Israelites to end up. So let's start first by thinking about the context. Verses 1 to 3. Let's think about the context. Pick up at verse 1. This is the command, the rules and the judgments which Yahweh your God commanded me to teach you to do. Where does Moses want them to end up? Well, at a first glance, it looks like he wants them to be a nation that plays by the rules. And in all fairness, it does sort of look like that. Talking about the command, the rules, and the judgments, it sounds like a law code. And they're there for the Israelites to do in the promised land. So, verse 2, you'll fear Yahweh your God by keeping all his rules and commands, which I am commanding you. And that makes sense to us. Just the other day, our president urged us to do the same, to wear masks in public, to practice social distancing, to be home before 9 p.m. In short, to stick to the rules. And we know just how disastrous it can be when people don't stick to the rules. It's the reason that the lockdown regulations had to tighten again. But when we slow down a bit, we see that actually there's more than just rule keeping going on here in Deuteronomy 6. For one thing, that isn't quite how the ancient Near East, how law worked in the ancient Near East. It wasn't so much about rule keeping as it was about wisdom and character. This is something we've looked at before, so if it's something that you'd like to think more about, then I'll leave some links in the description below for you for you to check out. But it is worth saying that seeing the law as more about wisdom and about character doesn't mean that it has less claim on us than if it was a set of rules. If anything, it has more. And it doesn't mean that we get to pick and choose. By calling it wisdom, it doesn't mean we get to pick and choose between these rules either. The thing is that rules only get us so far. We can't have a rule for absolutely every situation. That's why we need wisdom. But the rules give us a picture of what shape wisdom is meant to take, what wisdom is supposed to look like, so that we know it when we see it. The second thing that we should notice from verse 1 is that it's the command, singular, not the commands, plural. Moses tells us what's included in the command, the rules and the judgments, which I'm assuming is talking about all the laws in Deuteronomy, or at the very least the Ten Commandments, which he's just been through in the previous chapter. But it's all summed up in the command, singular. And it all comes down to one thing, which we'll talk about in a moment. We'll come back to it in a second, so just hold that thought. But before we do, there's a third thing that I think we should notice, and that's that God's law doesn't just come on its own. It's part of a story that began in Genesis 12 with Abraham. God promised Abraham that he would bless the socks off of him, that he would make him into a great nation, and that this great nation would have a land to call their home. That nation gets enslaved in Egypt in the book of Exodus, and God brings them out, leading them to this promised land. But they complain all the way there, to the point where in the book of Numbers, God says, fine, if you don't want the land, then don't have it. I'll give it to your children. As for you, you can wander around the desert for 40 years. Which brings us to Deuteronomy. Here is a new generation standing on the brink of the promised land, about to cross over the Jordan and take the land that God had promised to Abraham way back in Genesis 12. And the book of Deuteronomy is basically a series of sermons from Moses, who is telling the Israelites, guys, please don't blow it. Moses instructs them what God told him to. Why? Verse 2, so that you will fear Yahweh. Perhaps that sounds like a bit of a strange thing to say. Why would God want us to fear him? We might think of fear in terms of reverence or respect, but it's probably a bit stronger than that. In other places, like in chapter 5, fear really does mean scared, which is the way that I think we usually use the word fear. The Lord spoke with you face to face at the mountain, out of the midst of the fire, while I stood between the Lord and you at that time, to declare to you the word of the Lord. For you were afraid because of the fire, and you didn't go up the mountain. But that on its own isn't the response that God is looking for in chapter 6. This is the command. Yahweh, your God, commanded me to teach you so that you will fear Yahweh, your God. It brings these ideas together. It's a recognition of who God is and just what sort of God they're serving. A God who is powerful and God you really don't want to get on the wrong side of. But a recognition of who God is that works itself out in love and obedience. One writer puts it this way: to people who respond to the memory of the divine signs and wonders with submission and faith, fear means, or at least amounts to, awe. But those who respond with a sense of contempt or with a sense of entitlement, fear will ultimately express the frightening result of an encounter with the awesome God. That's what God wants from his people. Submission and faith, which works itself out in obedience. Which brings us to the second part of our passage today, the command that I said we'd come back to. This is what's meant to characterize them as they go into the land that God promised them. So let's think together about verse 4 and 5, the command. Pick up at verse 4. Listen, Israel, Yahweh is our God, Yahweh alone. You'll love Yahweh your God with all your heart and with all your being and with all your strength. These words are known as the Shema. Jesus said that this was the greatest commandment, and he actually wasn't the first to say so, or the first to think that. Still today, Jews say these words every morning and evening in prayer. For all its importance, though, actually a bit of a tricky phrase to work out. If you've been following along in your Bible, or if you're familiar with these words as they appear in most English translations, you might already know where I'm going with this. Is it the Lord our God, the Lord is one? Or is it the Lord is our God, the Lord alone? Most English translations go for the first of these, the Lord is one. It's saying something about God himself, that oneness is in some sense part of Yahweh's nature, that Yahweh is one and indivisible. And that's true. But for at least two reasons, I think the second option makes more sense. Listen, Israel, Yahweh is our God, Yahweh alone. The first reason is that in the ancient Near East, it was normal to believe in multiple gods. Polytheism was the norm. But it isn't just a feature of the ancient Near East in general, it was a feature of Canaan in particular, which is where the promised land was. That's where they were about to go. And so in a land that's filled with people who worship other gods, Moses is urging the Israelites, guys, please don't blow it. Stay faithful to Yahweh alone. And actually, just as an aside, if you go read, say, the book of Judges, something that keeps cropping up is that they were going after other gods, that they were being entangled in worshipping the gods of the Canaanites. Which brings us to the second reason, and that's that it fits best with what Moses is saying here in Deuteronomy. The first of the Ten Commandments is about worshipping Yahweh alone, which he's just been through a chapter ago. And he'll go on in chapter 6 to warn them against following other gods. Fear Yahweh your God, serve him, and take your oaths in his name. Do not follow other gods, the gods of the peoples around you. For Yahweh your God, who is among you, is a jealous God, and his anger will burn against you, and he will destroy you from the face of the land. And it's where he's going to go in the very next verse, in verse 5. You'll love Yahweh your God with all your heart and with all your being and with all your strength. Now, love is a word that we're familiar with. It's a word that we just spent a whole lot of time thinking about over the Christmas season. So I'll leave a link to Jason's sermon in the description below if that's something you'd like to go back and listen to again. What we should know about love here in Deuteronomy 6, though, is that it's chiefly about covenant loyalty. For those in covenant relationship with God, for you, if you're a Christian today, it's about commitment to him and no other. And it's a commitment that requires our all. You'll love Yahweh your God with all your heart and with all your being and with all your strength. Now the Israelites, they would have understood the heart to be talking about their inner being, which included their emotions, which fits with how we tend to talk about the heart today. But it would have been more than that too. It would have also included their intellect and their will. Our English Bibles then talk about loving God with all your soul, which is fine if we don't mean some immaterial substance, a ghost in the machine as imagined by Plato or Descartes. Whether we should actually think about the soul like that in general is a question for another day. The point here is that that isn't what Deuteronomy is talking about. The Hebrew word here, nephesh, basically means one's entire person. So maybe we should think about loving God with our being rather than with all our soul. Now, I've really only scratched the surface here. So if you'd like to dig deeper, again, I'll leave some links in the description below to a series of videos from Bible Project where they actually go through each of the important words here in the Shema. They talk about love and nephesh, soul or being, and so on. So if you'd like to dig deeper, then I'd really encourage you to go chase those up. But I think for now the point is clear enough. You'll be faithfully committed to and loyal to Yahweh alone with your entire self, with everything you are, and with everything you have. As one writer puts it, it's about covenant commitment rooted in the heart, but extending to every level of one's being. The question is, what does that actually mean for us? What does that actually look like for us? What does it mean to be loyal and to be devoted to Yahweh with our all, and to be devoted to Him alone? Really what it comes down to is a question of worship. We said already that the Israelites were on their way into Canaan, where they would be given a whole lot of options about which gods to worship. And that isn't quite our experience. But although we aren't being presented with a pantheon of deities to choose from, there are still plenty of things in our world around us that vie for our worship. There are still things that try to tell us that they're more important than God, or at least more urgent. And especially at the start of a new year, you might be sitting with all the best intentions in the world, with all the motivation to try jump on a new Bible reading plan, or to carve out time in your schedule to really spend time in prayer every day, or to kick that thorn in your side, that sin that's been bothering you for the past while. But then a crisis happens, or a deadline comes along, and poof, all our best intentions go out the window. Is that what it means to be loyal to Yahweh with our all, and to be devoted to Him alone? A lot of the time, I think it looks more like we've just found another God to bow down to. And I think Moses knew that. Which brings us to the last thing that we have to think about in our passage for today. And that's the carrying it out. At the start of a new year, motivation is high. It's a blank slate and we haven't duffed it yet. And maybe you have some New Year's resolutions and you still have the drive in you to make it happen. New year, new you. Let's go. But here's the thing. Motivation on its own won't help you. The way James Clear puts it in his book, Atomic Habits, motivation is overrated. Environment often matters more. And as it turns out, Moses seems to agree. Pick up at verse 6. These words which I am commanding you this day will be on your hearts, and you will repeat them to your children when you sit in your house, and when you're on your way, when you lie down, and when you stand up. Tie them to your hands, and have them as a symbol beneath your eyes. Write them on the doorposts of your houses and on your gates. Put it everywhere. Talk about wherever you go. Tie things to your hands and put things in front of your eyes. Put it on your gates. Put things in place to constantly remind you what you must do and where your loyalty must lie. It won't help just to rely on motivation. Environment is the invisible hand that shapes our behavior. We see this all the time in the way that shops are laid out. So James Clear writes, items at eye level tend to be purchased more than those that are near the floor. For this reason, you'll find expensive brand names featured in easy-to-reach locations on store shelves because they drive the most profit, while cheaper alternatives are tucked away in harder-to-reach spots. The same goes for end caps, which are those units at the end of aisles. End caps are money-making machines for retailers because they are obvious locations that encounter a lot of foot traffic. For example, 45% of Coca-Cola sales come specifically from the end of aisle racks. Don't put your Bible in a drawer. Put it on the table next to your bed, or on a coffee table, somewhere you're likely to pick it up and read it. Schedule time in your routine to spend time in prayer, and then set reminders on your phone. Don't just try to rely on your memory to know when to do it. And it works both ways. Put some distance or introduce a bit of friction between yourself and that thing that you want to stop doing. The space you're in has a huge impact on your behavior. Use that to your advantage. Use that to help you to love Yahweh, your God, with your all, and to love Him alone. But what about those things that aren't quite so measurable? That struggle against some or other sin. For instance, like impatience, or anger, or lust. What do you do about those? Well, I think we get a clue from a verse I sort of skipped over. These words which I am commanding you this day will be on your hearts, and you'll repeat them to your children. It isn't the only way, but it is an important way. We don't just need our environment or our things. We need each other. The picture we have here is actually quite similar to what we see in Proverbs. It's parents teaching their children, instructing them in the ways of the Lord, teaching them to fear the Lord in the way that we were talking about earlier. And that is an everyday sort of thing. You'll repeat them to your children, or you'll impress it upon your children. That's part of what's going on with living long in the land, which we saw in chapter 6, and it crops up again in the command to honor your parents in the Ten Commandments. If the Israelites reject God and go after other gods, eventually he'll kick them out of the land. He'll send them into exile, which by the end of the book of Kings, that's exactly what's happened. The point is that parents are to teach their children to love Yahweh with their all, and children are to listen to them, because if they fail to do so, they'll be kicked out. But while that's almost definitely the dynamic that Moses has in mind here, I think we can actually push it a little bit further and apply it a bit more generally. One of the ways that we'll learn to love God with our all is when we have our family to help us. Our nuclear family, sure, but also our church family. It's when we have others speaking into our lives, encouraging us to continue and to hold fast to God, letting us know when we've messed up, counseling us when we don't know what to do, and sometimes just being there, saying nothing at all. We need each other. Listen, Israel. Yahweh is our God. Yahweh alone. You'll love Yahweh your God with all your heart and with all your being, with all your strength. This, Jesus said, is the greatest commandment, that we're loyal to Yahweh alone, that we'd fear him and that we trust him, and that would work itself out in obedience to him. As 2021 gets underway, let's do everything we can to make that happen.